Welcome back to Secret Speaks. How has your day been? Now let's uncover the mystery hidden in today's story. They locked me in the basement on my 68th birthday, telling the neighbors I had gone away, laughing above me as if I had never existed. The woman I welcomed as a daughter stole my pearls, my son took envelopes of cash, and they whispered about sending me away to a home. But in the dark, I found the truth, and I swore I would never be silent again. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is how I fought back. I was 68 when the quiet of my house turned into something unbearable. Richard had been gone for almost a year, taken by a cruel illness that left me holding his old wool sweater at night as if it could still keep me warm. The silence of that house in Glendale pressed on me so heavy I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock echo through every room. Friends tried to visit, but when they left, the emptiness felt larger. I started leaving the television on just to have another voice around me. Daniel and Amanda came often those months. Daniel would bring groceries, Amanda would tidy up and talk about how hard it must be for me to manage the big house alone. At first I resisted when they suggested I sell it, but each time they painted the picture of me sitting there alone, the thought of joining them on Magnolia Drive sounded less frightening. Amanda kept saying it would be safer, easier, that Lily would love having her grandmother close. When the realtor put the sign in the yard in early spring of 2019, I stood on the porch and watched strangers tour the rooms Richard and I had painted together. Each footstep across those floors felt like a small theft, but I kept reminding myself that Daniel was right. I did not need all that space. Packing was harder than I expected. Every drawer held pieces of our life. I found the birthday cards Richard had saved, the watch he wore every Sunday morning, the photographs of family picnics where Daniel was just a boy with scraped knees. Amanda came over to help, efficient and brisk. She pointed at boxes and told me what to label. I moved slower, touching everything twice before I could let it go. She told me gently that I had to be practical, that I could not keep everything. One afternoon, Daniel sat at the kitchen table while I wrapped a porcelain vase Richard's mother had given us. He reached across and patted my hand. "Mom, you will be happier with us. Lily will keep you busy. And, Amanda, she has plans to fix up the guest room just for you." His voice carried warmth, but his eyes were tired, shadowed by something he did not explain. I chose to believe the promise in his words instead of the worry in his face. The night before closing, I walked through the backyard one last time. The roses Richard had planted were blooming early. I clipped a single bud and held it in my palm, feeling the thorns press against my skin. I whispered his name and asked him to forgive me for letting go of the place he loved so much. On the day the buyers signed the papers, I walked through the house one last time. The living room still smelled faintly of Richard's aftershave, and I closed my eyes to breathe it in. Amanda stood at the doorway with her phone in hand, reminding me we had to leave soon to meet the movers. Daniel carried the last box to the car. I lingered at the front door until Amanda called again, and finally I pulled it shut. The sound of the lock clicking felt final, like a chapter closing with no way back. At Magnolia Drive, their house stood newer and brighter than mine had ever been, 2 stories with a wide front porch. Amanda showed me the room at the back, freshly painted in pale blue. She smiled and said, "See, we wanted it to feel like home for you." I thanked her, though my throat tightened. Home was still back on Glendale Avenue, standing empty with other people's laughter soon to fill it. That night I lay in the new bed listening to the muffled sounds of Daniel and Amanda talking downstairs. Lily padded in softly to hug me goodnight, her hair smelling of shampoo and school notebooks. For a moment I felt comforted, as if maybe this decision would not be so heavy after all. Still, when the house grew quiet and the dark settled in, I stared at the ceiling and thought of Richard. I pictured him sitting in his chair, raising an eyebrow at me, asking if I was sure. My chest ached, but I whispered into the dark that I was trying, that I wanted to believe this new beginning could be gentler than the loneliness I had left behind. The next morning, I walked outside while Amanda bustled in the kitchen. The street was lined with trimmed hedges, children's bicycles, neighbors waving on their way to work. It was a tidy neighborhood full of families, not like the older street I had left. Across the way, a woman with silver hair, later I would learn her name was Helen, greeted me warmly and asked if I had just moved in. I nodded, trying to smile, though my eyes still burned. She said she loved baking pies for new neighbors and would bring one over soon. I thanked her, grateful for her kindness. When I turned back to the house, Daniel was standing in the doorway watching me. For a second, I thought he looked uncertain, almost apologetic. Then Amanda called his name and he disappeared inside. I stood there clutching my cardigan tight, telling myself that this was the right choice. Later that afternoon, Amanda gave me a tour of the house. She pointed to the kitchen she had remodeled, the living room with its large windows, the upstairs office where Daniel kept his computer. She told me that now I would not have to worry about grocery shopping alone, that she could drive me wherever I needed. Her tone was cheerful, but something about the way she said it made me feel small, as if I had lost more than just my old home. As I walked back to the room that was now mine, I noticed the movers had placed Richard's favorite chair by the window. I sat in it, ran my hand along the worn armrest, and felt tears prick my eyes. Out the window, I could see the street children riding bicycles, a dog barking at the corner. Life was moving forward all around me. I pressed my hand to the sweater folded on top of a box beside the chair, closed my eyes, and drew a long breath. This was the beginning of something different. I told myself again that I would try to believe it could be better, even if my heart still beat for what I had left behind. The first few weeks in the new house felt like walking into a play where everyone else knew their lines except me. My room was small but bright, painted pale blue with white curtains Amanda had chosen. She pointed out the fresh bedding and a lamp she said she bought just for me. I smiled, trying to sound grateful, though I missed the creak of my old floors and the smell of Richard's books stacked in our den. Lily became my comfort almost immediately. Every afternoon after school, she would run into my room, drop her backpack on the rug, and sprawl across my bed to tell me about her day. She talked about math tests and choir practice, about friends who were nice and others who were not. She whispered that sometimes she felt like nobody listened to her except me. I held her hand and told her she could always find safety in my room, that my door would never be closed to her. At first, Amanda seemed glad that Lily and I were close. She encouraged me to take her to the library to help with homework. I cooked dinner one evening, making chicken pot pie the way Richard had always loved. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks, and Lily asked for seconds. Amanda ate quietly and said it was fine, but later that night she told me I did not need to worry about cooking, that she had her own way of doing things in the kitchen. Her smile was polite, but her eyes lingered on the counter where I had left flour dust. The next morning I found 2 of my old casserole dishes sitting on the porch in a donation box. When I asked Amanda if they were mine, she said she thought they were duplicates and not worth keeping. I carried them back inside and placed them in my room instead of arguing. Daniel seemed weighed down all the time. He had lost his job at the software company in the fall of 2022, and although he applied here and there, the rejection emails piled up. He sat at the dining table scrolling on his laptop while Amanda reminded him about bills. Sometimes I wanted to comfort him, to remind him that I knew the pain of losing a role in life, but the wall between mother and grown son felt thicker now. Helen from across the street came by one afternoon, holding a pie that smelled of cinnamon and apples. She introduced herself, her voice cheerful, and said she liked to welcome new neighbors. Amanda thanked her quickly at the door, but I stepped forward taking the warm dish in my hands. Helen looked at me closely, then said I looked tired and asked if I was settling in. I told her I was adjusting, that change was always a little hard. She promised to stop by again soon and walked back across her neatly trimmed yard. I stood there watching her, strangely touched by the kindness of a stranger. As the days passed, Amanda began to clear away more of my things. A quilt Richard's aunt had made disappeared from the couch. My framed wedding photo ended up leaning against a wall in my room instead of hanging in the living room. When I asked Daniel if he minded, he rubbed his temples and said Amanda was only trying to keep the house uncluttered. One evening after dinner, I tried to help Lily with her science project at the kitchen table. Amanda walked in, glanced at the mess of papers and markers, and asked Lily why she was not working in her room. Lily hesitated, then looked at me with pleading eyes. I told her it was fine, we could move, but Lily whispered she wanted to stay with me. Amanda sighed and said it was important for Lily to be independent, then took the papers and carried them upstairs. I felt Lily's small hand tighten around mine before she followed her mother. That night, I sat alone in my chair by the window, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint murmur of Daniel and Amanda talking downstairs. I thought of Richard and how he would have frowned at the way I was being nudged aside in this house. I told myself not to complain, that I was lucky to have a roof over my head and family nearby. Yet my chest tightened each time something of mine vanished, or each time Amanda spoke for me as if I could not speak for myself. The tension surfaced more clearly one Saturday morning. I had risen early and started making pancakes for Lily, knowing how much she loved them. She bounced into the kitchen, her face lighting up, but Amanda appeared moments later and frowned at the stove. She said she had planned to take Lily out for breakfast, that my cooking had ruined the surprise. Daniel walked in, rubbing his eyes caught between us, and muttered that maybe we could all just eat together. Amanda looked at him sharply, then at me, and finally agreed, but the meal was quiet. Later, as I cleaned the dishes, Amanda leaned close and said softly, so Lily could not hear, that she did not need me confusing the household routine. I swallowed my words and nodded, though my hands shook as I dried the plates. I remembered the long years when Richard and I had built a family routine of our own, where every effort I made had been valued. Now, even making breakfast seemed like trespassing. That evening, Amanda stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed. She told me she appreciated that I wanted to help, but this was her home, her kitchen, her rules. She added that Daniel and she were providing for me now, not the other way around. The words landed heavy, sharp in my chest. For a moment, I could not breathe. I simply nodded, forcing myself not to cry in front of her. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping Richard's sweater, whispering into the fabric that I wished he were still here. I tried to steady myself, telling my heart to be patient. I was here to be with family, to be with Lily, to have a place in their lives. But as the sun set outside and the walls of that pale blue room closed in, I realized how fragile that place already felt. The days that followed carried a strange heaviness, as if the walls themselves whispered that I no longer belonged. Amanda's words echoed in my ears long after she had walked away. And though I tried to keep myself busy, I could not shake the feeling that something in the house had shifted. Helen came by one afternoon carrying a basket of muffins. She smiled politely but kept studying me as we sat on the porch. She asked if I was settling in, if I needed anything. Before I could answer, Amanda stepped outside, slipping an arm around my shoulders as if to steady me. She told Helen with a light laugh that I sometimes forgot where I put things, that adjusting to a new home at my age was difficult. Helen's smile faltered and she glanced at me with uncertainty. I forced a chuckle, pretending it was all harmless, but inside my stomach twisted. After Helen left, I asked Amanda why she said such things. She waved her hand as if it were nothing, insisting that neighbors liked little anecdotes and that I should not take everything so seriously. I bit my tongue, but later when I saw Helen across the street watering her flowers, I felt shame burn my cheeks. What must she think of me now? Inside the house, small inconveniences began piling up. One morning, I reached for the spare keys I always kept in the drawer of my nightstand, but they were gone. Amanda told me she had collected them for safekeeping, that too many sets were confusing. The television in the living room suddenly required a new password. When I asked Daniel about it, he mumbled that Amanda had changed the streaming accounts to keep things organized. He promised to ask her for the code, but days passed and he never did. I sat alone in my room clutching a crossword book, missing the simple comfort of watching old movies in the evening. Daniel's distance cut deeper than Amanda's barbs. When I tried to speak with him about my unease, he rubbed his forehead and said he had enough to worry about. The bills, the job search, the mortgage, everything pressed on him. He said Amanda was handling things the best she could, and that I should try not to add more stress. His voice held exhaustion, and I recognized the son who once came to me for comfort, but now looked at me as if I were another burden. Lily noticed the changes too. She grew quieter around me, sneaking into my room only when she was sure her mother would not hear. She whispered that Amanda told her I needed more rest, that I was forgetful, that she should not depend on me so much. I held her close, assuring her that my mind was still strong, that I remembered every story I ever told her about when her father was little. She smiled bravely but pulled away quickly when Amanda's footsteps sounded in the hall. One evening, Helen caught me outside taking out the trash. She asked gently if everything was all right. She said Amanda had mentioned I sometimes misplaced things, but Helen wondered if maybe it was just the stress of moving. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess how isolated I felt, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I smiled and said I was fine, thanking her for the muffins. She touched my arm and told me she was across the street if I ever needed anything. That night, I searched my dresser for the pearl necklace Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary. The velvet box was missing. My hands trembled as I pulled open drawers and checked every corner of the closet. Finally, I went to Amanda, my voice shaking, and asked if she had seen it. She looked up from her phone, her expression perfectly calm, and said, "Perhaps I had misplaced it. Maybe I had left it somewhere back at the old house, or maybe I simply forgot." Her tone was light, almost playful, as she added that it was normal at my age. The words cut like a knife. I knew exactly where I had kept that necklace. Richard had clasped it around my neck with tears in his eyes the night we celebrated with family. I would never forget it, never misplace it. Standing there in Amanda's tidy living room, I felt my throat close. Daniel sat in his chair nearby, eyes fixed on the television, silent. He did not defend me, did not even glance my way. I returned to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed my palms into my lap to stop the shaking. Amanda's voice rang in my ears, telling Helen that I forgot things, telling me I must have misplaced the necklace. For the first time, I wondered if this was not carelessness or coincidence, but something intentional. Something meant to make me question myself, to make others question me. As the house grew quiet and Lily's laughter faded into her bedroom upstairs, I clutched Richard's sweater to my chest. My heart pounded heavy with both anger and fear. I whispered into the darkness that I knew the truth that I had not forgotten. And if Amanda thought she could erase me piece by piece, she was wrong. I lay down staring at the pale ceiling, my mind racing with the image of Amanda's calm face and Daniel's silence. The necklace was gone, and with it the last shred of comfort I had carried from my marriage. The emptiness inside me deepened, but beneath it a spark of defiance flickered, fragile but alive. I could not sleep that night, the image of the empty jewelry box gnawing at me. I knew where I had left that necklace, and Amanda's smile when she told me I must have forgotten made my stomach twist. I sat up in bed, staring at the pale blue walls, and felt an anger rising that I had not felt in years. If no one in this house would believe me, then I needed proof. The next morning, I walked across the street to Helen's house, under the pretense of returning her pie plate. She invited me in for coffee, and her warm kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon eased my nerves. I lowered my voice and asked if she knew anyone who could set up a small camera. Her eyebrows rose and she studied me closely. I told her I was worried about losing things in the house, that sometimes items disappeared. Helen tapped her finger on the table and said her nephew had helped her set up security cameras when there had been break-ins nearby. She offered to call him. Relief swept through me, and within 2 days a pair of tiny cameras were tucked into the corners of the kitchen and living room, hidden behind books and a vase of flowers. For the first time in weeks, I felt less helpless. I checked the feed late at night on my phone, watching the empty rooms, the hum of the refrigerator, the play of shadows. The stillness gave me little comfort, but I told myself that if Amanda tried to paint me as forgetful again, I would know the truth. It did not take long before the recordings revealed more than I expected. One afternoon, while Daniel was out, I saw Amanda usher a tall man into the kitchen. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and spoke in a low voice. I recognized him from the neighborhood, once or twice introduced as Gregory Stanton, a financial advisor. They leaned close, their voices hushed, and though I could not catch every word, I heard phrases like accounts withdrawal and signatures. Amanda laughed softly when Gregory touched her hand. My chest tightened as I watched. Daniel was struggling with unemployment, and yet Amanda was whispering with another man about money in my own house. I replayed the footage again and again, the unease in my stomach deepening. Days later, I caught another conversation. Amanda leaned against the counter, pouring Gregory a cup of coffee. I heard her mention Silver Oaks Assisted Living, the facility across town that specialized in senior care. Gregory nodded, his words barely audible, but I picked out placement, transition, and paperwork. My heart thudded in my ears. Were they talking about me, about sending me away as if I were already gone? I tried to approach Daniel that evening, telling him that Amanda seemed to be spending time with Gregory, but Daniel's face darkened. He said Gregory was just helping them with finances, that I did not need to worry about things I did not understand. He rubbed his temples, muttered about bills piling up, and walked away. His silence felt like another lock turning against me. Late one night, as the house slept, I opened the feed again. Amanda moved through the kitchen alone, her robe tied loosely around her waist. She opened the cabinet where I had once kept my jewelry box and pulled out the string of pearls. She held it up to the light, the pearls gleaming against her fingers. Then she smiled, a satisfied curl of her lips, and slipped the necklace into her pocket before turning off the light. I covered my mouth to keep from crying out. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I replayed the moment over and over. The necklace was not lost, and I had not forgotten. Amanda had taken it just as I had feared. The proof was there in glowing pixels, undeniable. I sat back in my chair, trembling. The anger that had been smoldering now burned hot. Amanda wanted everyone to believe I was losing my mind, but I had her caught in the act. I thought of Helen, of her kind eyes when she asked if I was all right. I thought of Lily clinging to me in secret because she was afraid of her mother. I knew then that I could not stay silent much longer. I closed the phone, pressed Richard's sweater to my chest, and whispered into the dark that I was ready. Amanda thought she could erase me piece by piece, but I had seen the truth. And now, for the first time, I had proof that could not be denied. The morning of my 68th birthday, I woke with a small flicker of hope. Despite everything I told myself Amanda and Daniel would remember. I put on my best blouse, the pale pink one Richard had always liked, and brushed my hair carefully. When I came downstairs, Amanda greeted me with a quick smile, then handed me a laundry basket. She said she needed help checking the basement dryer because it was making a strange noise. I carried the basket down the narrow steps, the cool air wrapping around me. As I bent to set the basket near the dryer, I heard the click of the door above me. At first I thought Amanda had simply closed it, but when I tried the knob, it would not turn. My pulse quickened. I called up, but no answer came. Minutes later, music floated through the floorboards, the thump of bass, the clink of glasses, laughter rising in waves. I pressed my ear to the door and caught Amanda's voice greeting friends. She told them I had gone away for the weekend, that I wanted a quiet little retreat for my birthday. The lie sank deep into me like ice. I pounded on the door until my fists ached. My voice cracked as I shouted for Daniel, for Lily, for anyone to hear me. The music grew louder, swallowing my cries. I sank onto the bottom step, trembling, tears running hot down my cheeks. Upstairs, I heard the scrape of chairs, the burst of laughter that meant a toast. I pictured Amanda raising her glass, smiling as if she had erased me. The betrayal stung so sharply I could hardly breathe. Then there was a knock at the front door above me. I held my breath and listened. Helen's voice carried through, cheerful as always. She had come to bring me a small gift, a card she had written by hand. Daniel answered. His tone was flat, almost annoyed, as he told her I had already celebrated earlier in the day and gone to rest. He insisted I was fine, that she should not worry. Silence followed, then Helen's polite goodbye. I pressed my forehead against the step, grief and fury twisting inside me. If Helen believed him, then my one chance of being seen that night had slipped away. I cried then, not just from the loneliness of being forgotten, but from the cruelty of being locked away like some unwanted thing. My sobs echoed off the concrete walls. But in the hollow of that basement, something hardened. I wiped my face with the hem of my blouse and told myself I would not let this be the end of my story. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. I still had the cameras Helen's nephew had installed, and the files were there waiting for me. As the noise of the party thundered above me, I scrolled through clip after clip. I saw Amanda leaning in close to Gregory Stanton at my kitchen table, their voices low, their hands brushing. Words like withdrawal and account slipped from their lips. I watched Daniel enter later, his shoulders slumped, accepting an envelope from Gregory. He counted the cash quickly before tucking it into his pocket. My stomach turned. Scrolling further, I caught Amanda whispering about Silver Oaks assisted living, talking about placement and transition. Gregory nodded, promising paperwork would be ready soon. My throat tightened. They were planning to move me out, to strip me of my home, my dignity, everything Richard and I had built. I sat back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. The betrayal from Daniel cut deepest. My own son taking money from a man who wanted to profit off me. I replayed the clip, hoping I had misheard, but the truth was clear. As I kept watching, I found emails stored on the family computer, messages I had never seen. My phone synced with the account when Amanda had insisted on updating my settings weeks ago. Hundreds of emails from Meredith filled the folder dated back years. Pleas for me to call, letters about her children, her job at the county office, her love for me. all unread, all diverted into a hidden folder. Amanda had blocked them. Tears blurred my vision as I opened one written on Mother's Day of 2021. Meredith had written that she missed me desperately, that she could not understand why I would not answer. She begged me to at least write a single line so she would know I was well. I clutched the phone against my chest and sobbed until I could hardly breathe. The laughter upstairs grew louder, and the cruel contrast made me shake with fury. Amanda was celebrating while I sat in the dark basement, uncovering years of theft and lies. I closed my eyes and whispered to Richard that I was not weak, that I would fight. I wiped my tears, reopened the files, and forwarded every clip and email to Meredith's address. My hand steadied as I typed her name. I did not know if she would see it tonight, but I prayed she would. When I hit send, I felt a small flame of strength flicker inside me. Amanda thought she had silenced me, thought she had locked me away like a broken piece of furniture. But I had seen everything. I had proof, and I was not finished yet. My fingers shook as I dialed Meredith's number, praying it had not changed. The call rang twice before her voice came through, cautious, tired, the voice of a daughter who had been ignored for too long. When I whispered her name, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. She asked if it was really me, if she was dreaming, if this was another wrong number. I told her I was locked in the basement of Daniel's house, that Amanda had taken everything, that Gregory Stanton was plotting with her. The words tumbled out between sobs. For a long moment she said nothing, and then I heard her crying too, telling me she had written for years, begged for answers, thought I had chosen to cut her out. The pain in her voice stabbed through me. I told her I never saw a single message, that Amanda had kept them from me, that I had just found them buried in a hidden folder. Meredith said she had suspected something was wrong, but every time she drove by Daniel's house, Amanda waved her off, saying I was resting or away. I told her I had proof now, recordings from cameras. Helen's nephew had installed files that showed Amanda and Gregory planning to steal more than $130,000. I described the envelope of cash Daniel took, the way he counted it quickly and shoved it into his pocket. Meredith's voice turned from grief to anger, sharp and steady. She told me to forward everything to her county email, that she would make sure it was safe. I sent the files, trembling, watching the progress bar inch across the screen, terrified the battery would die before it finished. When she confirmed she had them, I nearly collapsed with relief. She said she would call Michael Green, an elder law attorney she worked with on other cases, and that she would also contact her supervisor at Adult Protective Services. I could hear papers shuffling as she took notes, her professional side clicking into place even through her tears. She told me to hold on, that she would get me out, that she had the law on her side. I pressed the phone to my ear and let her words wrap around me. For the first time in years, I felt like a mother again, not a forgotten relic. The noise of the party upstairs thundered through the floor, Amanda's laughter cutting sharp as glass. I whispered to Meredith that I was scared that I could hear them celebrating while I sat in the dark. She told me she would not let them win, that she was already on her way to Pomona with Ryan. She said to keep the phone close to save my strength. I clutched Richard's sweater and tried to slow my breathing. I thought about Lily trapped in the middle of her parents' lies and prayed she would be safe. I thought of Helen, her eyes full of concern, and hoped she would still trust me when the truth came out. An hour passed, maybe more. I kept listening to the party above my body, stiff on the concrete step. The battery on my phone slipped to 20%. Meredith called back, her voice urgent. She said Detective Carla Ramirez from Pomona PD was reviewing the evidence already, that Green was drafting an emergency petition for an ex parte order. My heart pounded. She told me again to stay calm, to remember that the proof was stronger than their lies. I whispered that Amanda would never forgive me that Daniel had turned into someone I barely recognized. Meredith said Amanda's forgiveness meant nothing, that Daniel's choices were his own, but the law would hold them accountable. Her steadiness anchored me even as fear gnawed at my stomach. Upstairs, the music shifted to a slower song. I heard the scrape of a chair, Amanda's voice murmuring close to Gregory's. The sound made my skin crawl. I thought of the necklace she had slipped into her pocket, of the lies she had told Helen, of the way she had smiled when she locked the basement door. Rage rose in me like a tide. I told Meredith I would not stay silent anymore, that I would face them when the time came. She said she believed me, that she was proud of me, that she loved me. The words broke something inside me, and I pressed the phone tight as tears streamed down my face. When the line finally went quiet, I sat in the darkness, the hum of the dryer filling the silence. My heart beat hard, but steady. I had reached her. I had proof in her hands, and the walls Amanda had built around me were beginning to crack. I closed my eyes and whispered that I was ready for whatever came next. I sat on the cold step, the phone still warm in my hand, when I heard a soft creak above me. The music from the party had dulled voices muffled by closed doors, and for the first time all evening there was a fragile silence. Then came the sound of feet on the stairs, hesitant light almost too soft to hear. I held my breath. The basement door rattled faintly, as if someone's small hand had gripped the knob, but did not yet have the courage to turn it. I whispered Lily's name, my voice barely carrying. The knob twisted again, and this time the door opened a few inches. A sliver of light spilled into the darkness. Lily's face appeared in the crack, pale and wide-eyed. She looked down at me, her lips trembling. "Grandma, are you okay?" she whispered. Tears burned my eyes at the sound of her voice. I told her I was fine, that I only needed her help. She glanced over her shoulder, fear etched in her young features, and then she slipped inside, closing the door behind her. She knelt beside me, her small hands clutching mine. "Mom said you were gone," she whispered, "that you wanted to spend your birthday away." I shook my head, choking back anger. I told her the truth, that Amanda had locked me down here so no one would know. Lily's eyes filled with tears torn between love and loyalty. She said if her mother found out she was here, she would be punished. I cupped her cheek and told her sometimes doing the right thing takes courage. From her backpack, she pulled a small velvet box. I froze when I saw it, recognizing it instantly. She said she had found the necklace hidden in Hio Young, had to carry such weight. We sat there for a moment longer, listening to the hum of the dryer, the faint murmur of voices above. The fear lingered, but beneath it grew a fire I had not felt in years. I kissed Lister Mother's dresser, that she had taken it because she knew it was mine. My fingers trembled as I opened the box, the pearls glowing faintly in the dim light. A sob escaped me. I told her she had given me back a piece of Richard, a piece of myself. We clung to each other, two souls bound by love and fear. She told me she felt trapped too, always caught in the middle of her parents' fights, always told not to trust me. She said she believed me, that she wanted to stay close, but her mother controlled everything. I held her shoulders and told her she was braver than she knew. Footsteps echoed faintly above us, and she flinched. I pulled her close, whispering that she had already saved me by coming here, and now it was my turn to protect us both. She nodded, wiping her tears quickly, her young face hardening with determination. I told her we would not be beaten, that truth was on our side. She pressed the necklace into my palm as if passing me a torch. My heart ached with both gratitude and sorrow that a child Sally's forehead and whispered, "You saved me, my sweet girl. Now I will save us." She smiled weakly, her eyes shining, and for the first time that night I believed we might actually find our way out of the shadows. The basement felt heavier after I ended the call with Meredith. The air pressed against me damp and close, and my heart pounded with both hope and fear. My daughter was on her way, but the thought of waiting in that cold place left me restless. I shifted on the wooden step, straining my ears for any sound above me. The music still thudded, faintly mixed with the murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter. Amanda's party was still going strong. I leaned my head against the wall, exhausted, when I caught something new, the faint scrape of sneakers on wood. My pulse quickened. Whoever was moving upstairs was lighter than an adult. The sound crept toward the basement door, paused, then the knob rattled softly. I held my breath. A small voice floated down, barely audible. "Grandma." My heart leapt. I whispered Lily's name, my voice trembling. The door cracked open an inch, letting a slice of warm light spill across the stairs. I saw her face peek through pale and uncertain eyes, darting behind her as if she expected Amanda to appear any second. I told her quickly to come in. She slipped inside, closing the door carefully until the lock clicked shut again. She hurried down the steps and threw her arms around me, clinging so tightly I felt her fear through her shaking hands. "Grandma, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mom told everyone you went away for your birthday. She said you wanted to be alone." The lie cut deeper, hearing it from Lily's lips. I pulled her close and told her the truth, that Amanda had locked me down here and told everyone else a story. Lily pulled back, tears brimming. Her lips trembled as she said she knew something was wrong, that she had heard my voice faintly through the floor earlier, but her mother told her not to listen. I stroked her hair, trying to steady her. "You listened anyway," I said softly. "That means you have a stronger heart than anyone in this house." She shook her head, whispering that she was scared that her mother always warned her never to disobey, never to question. She said Daniel had been silent lately, leaving Amanda's words as the only truth she heard day after day. Her small hands fumbled with the zipper of her backpack. She pulled out a worn velvet box, the sight of it making my breath catch. She pressed it into my hands. "I knew it was yours," she said quickly. "I saw Mom put it in her dresser weeks ago. I was afraid she would sell it, so I took it and hid it in my school bag." My fingers trembled as I opened it. The pearls lay inside, smooth and luminous, just as Richard had fastened them around my neck so many years ago on our 25th anniversary. A sob burst from me. I pressed the necklace against my cheek, whispering thank you again and again. Lily's eyes shone with both pride and fear. I told her she had given me back more than jewelry. She had given me proof, but also a piece of my life that Amanda tried to erase. Lily leaned against me, whispering that she hated the lies, that she hated pretending. She said she felt trapped, forced to choose between her parents and her own heart. We sat together on the cold step, the hum of the dryer filling the silence. I told her I understood. I said I had spent months doubting myself, wondering if Amanda was right, if maybe I was slipping. But seeing her bravery reminded me of who I was. She whispered that sometimes she wished she could live with me instead, that things felt easier when we were together. Her voice cracked when she admitted she was afraid of what Amanda might do if she found out she had come down to the basement. I cupped her face in my hands and told her some truths were worth the risk. Footsteps thumped overhead, sending her eyes wide. She grabbed my arm, panicked, but the sounds drifted away again, back toward the music and laughter. She exhaled shakily. I told her we needed to be smart. Meredith was on her way. There would be questions, investigations, the truth would come out. But until then, she needed to be careful to protect herself. She nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. Then she pressed the necklace firmly into my palm. "Keep this safe," she whispered. "If anything happens, they cannot take this away again." My heart broke at the weight of responsibility. She carried a child protecting her grandmother when it should have been the other way around. I pulled her into my arms, rocking her gently. "You saved me tonight," I told her. "You proved I am not invisible." Her tears soaked through my blouse as she clung tighter. After a long silence, she pulled back and looked at me with eyes far older than her years. "What will happen now, Grandma?" I kissed her forehead and told her the truth. I did not know exactly, but I promised her one thing. We would not be beaten. We would not let Amanda's lies define us. Her lip quivered, but then she nodded, determination shining through her fear. She whispered that she believed me, that she trusted me more than anyone. I held her hands in mine, squeezing them firmly. "You saved me, my sweet girl," I told her. "Now it is my turn. Now I will save us." We sat in the dim basement together, two hearts bound by love and defiance, listening to the muffled party upstairs. For the first time that night, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt the spark of a fight I had not known I still carried, and I knew we would find a way forward. Lily's small hand clung to mine as we climbed the basement stairs, every creak of the steps making my pulse hammer louder. The party upstairs had grown rowdy, glasses, clinking, voices raised in laughter, but to me it sounded like the roar of an enemy camp. When I pushed the door open, the sudden brightness of the kitchen stung my eyes. Amanda turned a glass of wine in her hand, her smile freezing as she saw us. For a heartbeat, her face went pale before twisting into a mask of disbelief. Daniel nearly dropped his drink, muttering my name under his breath, as though I were a ghost who had wandered into the room. The guests fell silent one by one, the music still pulsing in the background, their gazes darting between us and Amanda. I walked forward slowly, Lily's grip tightening my steps steady despite the tremble in my legs. Amanda's voice cracked as she demanded to know what I was doing out of the basement. She said it like I was a prisoner who had escaped. I reached the living room where my laptop sat on the side table, exactly where I had left it earlier. Amanda lunged toward it, but I got there first. I opened it with practiced hands, the screen glowing to life. Gasps rippled through the room as I clicked on the folder and pressed play. On the screen, Amanda and Gregory Stanton appeared in my kitchen, leaning close, whispering about accounts and forged signatures. Her laughter rang out sharp and unmistakable. Then came the footage of Daniel accepting the envelope of cash, counting it quickly before pocketing it. The room fell utterly still, except for the voices playing through the speakers. Amanda's face turned crimson. She shouted that it was fake, that I had manipulated the footage. She pointed at me, her voice shrill, accusing me of being confused, of not knowing what I was doing. Daniel stammered, insisting he did not know what the envelope was, that he was just holding it for Gregory. His eyes darted wildly, unable to settle. The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmurs spreading. Some of Amanda's friends stood and moved toward the door, unwilling to be part of what they were witnessing. Lily pressed close against my side, her body trembling. I wrapped an arm around her, never taking my eyes off Amanda. I raised my voice above the chaos, steady and strong. I told them all that I was not weak, that I was not losing my memory. I said I had proof of every lie, every theft, every cruel plan they had spun behind my back. Amanda tried to drown me out with her shrieking, but the video kept playing, her own voice betraying her. Daniel stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. He reached for the laptop, muttering that I was embarrassing the family. I pulled it back, my hands steady now, and looked directly into his eyes. I asked him how much his mother's dignity was worth, how much Gregory had paid him to sell me out. His face crumpled, but he said nothing. Amanda's voice rose to a scream as she accused me of trying to ruin her marriage, her life, her home. She spun toward the guests, pleading with them to believe her, but the evidence glowed on the screen, undeniable, damning. I felt a fire ignite inside me, stronger than fear, stronger than grief. My voice cut through the room, clear and unwavering. I told them I was not helpless, that I had been watching, that I had gathered every piece of proof I needed. I said that the truth was now out in the open, and they would pay for what they had done. Amanda froze, her mouth hanging open, her hands shaking as if she wanted to grab me and shake me silent, but could not move under the weight of the stares around her. Daniel stood rooted to the floor, his silence louder than any denial. I shut the laptop with a decisive snap and held it to my chest. Around us, the guests whispered, their faces filled with unease, some already edging toward the door. The music still pulsed faintly from the speakers, but felt hollow now, the celebration drained away. I tightened my grip on Lily's hand and faced Amanda directly. My voice rang steady, cutting through the thick silence. I am not powerless. I have the evidence, and you will pay for this. The room held its breath, the moment suspended like glass about to shatter. The room stayed frozen for only a moment before the pounding on the front door shattered the silence. Conversations cut off, glasses clinked as someone set them down too quickly, and Amanda's eyes darted to the entryway in panic. She hissed at Daniel to answer it, but he stood rigid, his face ashen. The pounding came again, followed by a firm voice calling out that it was the Pomona Police Department. My heart lurched, hope and fear colliding. Lily pressed closer against me, her fingers digging into my arm. Amanda snapped out of her shock and marched toward the door, trying to paste on a smile. But the door swung open before she could even reach for the knob. Detective Carla Ramirez stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Behind them came Meredith, her face pale but steady, and Michael Green briefcase in hand. Amanda's party guests shrank back against the walls, the festive air collapsing into a thick, choking tension. Amanda's voice rose in a pitch I had never heard before. She demanded to know why they were here, shouted that this was a private gathering. Detective Ramirez held up a document, her tone calm but sharp. She said she had a warrant to search the premises based on evidence of financial fraud and elder abuse. Amanda's face twisted. She spun toward me, pointing a shaking finger. "She is lying!" she shrieked. "She is old and confused. You cannot believe anything she says." Meredith stepped forward, then her voice trembling but strong. She told them she had received dozens of files from me that very night, that she had verified the emails and recordings. Green added that the judge had already signed an emergency order. The officers moved past Amanda and began opening drawers, seizing files, their gloved hands efficient and unyielding. Helen appeared suddenly at the doorway, clutching her cardigan around her shoulders. She must have crossed the street when she saw the police arrive. She spoke loudly, her voice carrying above the chaos, telling Detective Ramirez that she had heard me calling for help through the basement door earlier that night. She said she had tried to ask Daniel about it but had been brushed off. Her testimony landed heavy, another nail in Amanda's lies. Amanda's screams grew wilder as Gregory Stanton walked in from the kitchen, his expression stiff and calculating. He tried to slide quietly toward the back door, but one of the officers intercepted him. Ramirez held up a folder she had pulled from his briefcase, filled with forged documents and bank transfers. Gregory's face drained of color. Daniel stood near the fireplace, hands twitching, sweat glistening at his temple. He mumbled that it was all a misunderstanding, that Gregory handled their accounts, and Amanda just followed advice. He looked at Meredith, his eyes pleading, but she only stared back, years of pain and silence hardening her gaze. The officers moved swiftly. Gregory was the first to be cuffed, his protests cut short as Ramirez recited his rights. Amanda lunged toward them, clawing at the officer's arm, screaming that none of it was true, that I had poisoned everyone against her. She kicked, shouted, and finally the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Her face contorted as she turned toward me, her voice raw and ragged. She screeched that I would not win, that I had destroyed her life, that she would never let me take Daniel away from her. Her words echoed in the stunned silence of the room, the guests staring in horror, some already slipping out into the night. Daniel took a step forward as if to defend her, but his legs buckled. He gripped the back of a chair, his head lowered. He whispered that it was not supposed to go this far, that he had only wanted to ease the bills, that he had never meant for me to be hurt. His words dissolved into silence as the officers led Amanda toward the door, her shrieks echoing through the hallway. Lily pressed her face into my side, trembling. I stroked her hair, whispering that she was safe now. Meredith's hand touched my shoulder, grounding me, her eyes shining with tears. For the first time in years, I felt her closeness, the bond Amanda had tried to sever, blooming back to life. The last image of Amanda I saw that night was her face twisted with fury as the officers guided her out into the cool night air. She threw her head back and screamed that I would never win, her voice breaking into a ragged howl. The cuffs glinted under the porch light as the door swung shut behind her. Daniel remained silent, his shoulders slumped, his eyes wet with something that looked like regret, but came too late. The party was over, the house emptied of its noise, leaving behind only the heavy truth. And in that silence, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the arrests moved like a blur, though every headline and every phone call etched itself into my memory. Gregory Stanton's name appeared in the Pomona paper, accused of financial fraud, exploitation of seniors, and conspiracy. His office downtown shut its doors overnight, his clients pulling their money as state investigators pored over every file. News anchors repeated the words stripped of license and potential prison term. Each time I heard it, I felt a grim weight lift from my chest. Amanda's fall came just as swiftly. The friends who had once filled her house with laughter and wine nights no longer returned her calls. She was indicted on charges of fraud and elder abuse. Her face shone in the local news as cameras captured her being led into court in an orange jumpsuit. I watched from Meredith's couch, Lily curled up beside me, as the anchor read her name with the same tone reserved for criminals. My heart clenched not with pity, but with the bitter knowledge that she had dug this grave herself. Daniel's world collapsed in quieter ways. The mortgage payments he had counted on Gregory's help to manage stopped. The house on Magnolia Drive fell into foreclosure within months. He was left alone, his reputation in tatters. People at church looked away when he walked in. Parents avoided him at school pickup. Lily no longer lived with him. The court granted Meredith temporary guardianship, and Lily carried her backpack into her aunt's house with a brave face, though I saw her wipe her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Meredith helped me settle into her riverside home, a modest house with sunlight spilling through the kitchen window in the mornings. She gave me the spare bedroom and told me I would never be alone again. At night, I listened to the sound of her children laughing down the hall, a balm against the hollow nights I had spent in silence. Then 1 week after Amanda's arrest, an envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was Daniel's, shaky but familiar. I sat at the table staring at it, unable to move. Finally, I slid a knife under the flap and pulled out a lined sheet of paper. His words were uneven, blotted in places as though written through tears. He wrote that he was sorry that he had let desperation and weakness twist him into someone he did not recognize. He said he never meant to hurt me, but admitted he had stood by when Amanda did, and that was just as cruel. He begged for a chance to make it right. The letter shook in my hands as I finished it. My chest ached with longing for the boy who had once run into my arms after Little League games, face shining with pride. But the man who had accepted money to betray me was not that boy anymore. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The next week, another letter came, then another. Daniel wrote every Sunday without fail. He told me he was looking for work that he was trying to rebuild, that he wanted to be a father Lily could trust again. He asked me to write back even one line to know that I still thought of him as my son. Each time I read his words, I felt torn down the middle. Part of me ached to forgive, to believe he could change. Another part hardened, reminding me of the basement door locked tight of his silence when Amanda called me, forgetful of his eyes refusing to meet mine when I begged him to see me. One afternoon, Lily came into my room carrying the day's mail. She saw the stack of Daniel's envelopes tied with ribbon on my dresser. She asked if I had written him back. I shook my head. She looked down at the floor, her voice small as she said, "He talked about me when they spoke on the phone, that he cried sometimes." My heart twisted, but I stayed silent. Meredith told me not to rush. She said forgiveness was mine to give, not his to demand. She reminded me that healing takes time, that wounds this deep do not close overnight. Still, each Sunday when the new envelope arrived, I found myself sitting in the quiet of my room, unfolding the paper, reading every word, then placing it carefully on the stack. One evening, I sat alone at the table with his latest letter, the sunlight fading through the curtains. The house was quiet, Meredith at work late, Lily upstairs doing homework. I read Daniel's words again and again until they blurred into nothing but shapes. He wrote that he prayed for me every night, that he wanted me to know he still loved me. I laid the paper flat, my fingers pressing into the creases. My face reflected in the darkened window lined with age and grief, but steady. The ache of betrayal throbbed in my chest, but alongside it grew a fierce certainty. Some wounds might never heal fully, but I was no longer powerless. I was not voiceless. I sat there in silence. The letter opened before me, my face caught between sorrow and steel. The morning light in Riverside felt different, softer somehow as it filtered through Meredith's kitchen window. I had been living with her for weeks now, and each day carried a sense of both healing and rebuilding. Ryan would kiss Meredith goodbye before work, Charlie would race through the house with his backpack bouncing, and the sound of life and motion reminded me how far I had come from the silence of Glendale and the suffocating walls of Magnolia Drive. My room in Meredith's home was smaller than the one Amanda had painted for me, but it was filled with warmth. Photographs of the children decorated the walls. A quilt Meredith found at a local craft fair lay across my bed, and my favorite chair sat by the window. For the first time in years, I felt I was part of a home instead of a burden tucked into a corner. Lily visited often, sometimes every weekend, sometimes during the week after school. She and Charlie grew close quickly, their laughter spilling across the yard as they chased each other through the sprinklers or built forts out of blankets in the living room. She seemed lighter, freer, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear. One afternoon she hugged me tightly and whispered that she felt safe again. My heart swelled, knowing that despite all we had endured, she still trusted me with her joy. I began to step outside of myself, too. Meredith encouraged me to join a volunteer program at the senior center downtown. At first, I resisted, nervous about meeting strangers after so much pain, but she insisted. The first time I walked into that building, greeted by smiling faces and warm voices, I felt a spark return. I helped organize events read to those whose eyesight had faded and joined a group that wrote letters to residents of nursing homes. In giving my time, I found a piece of myself I thought I had lost. Ryan teased that I was busier than he was, always rushing to a meeting or a class. But in truth, I cherished each task. It reminded me that my life still carried meaning, that I was more than what Amanda tried to reduce me to. Each handshake, each shared laugh, rebuilt my sense of belonging. Daniel's letters still arrived every week. I kept them stacked in a small box by my bed. Sometimes I read them twice, sometimes I let them sit unopened for days. He wrote of job interviews, of trying to rebuild his faith, of missing Lily. He always ended with the same words, "I love you, Mom. Please forgive me." My heart ached each time, but I held firm. Forgiveness was not something to rush. The letters stayed in their box, a reminder of both my grief and my strength. Amanda remained in county jail awaiting trial. News of her case surfaced occasionally, stories of how friends and neighbors had distanced themselves. Gregory's license had been revoked, his name permanently tarnished, and his family avoided reporters outside the courthouse. Karma had unfolded not quickly but steadily, and I no longer felt invisible in its wake. One bright Saturday, Meredith suggested a picnic at Fairmount Park. We packed sandwiches, fruit, and a blanket. Lily and Charlie ran ahead holding hands, their voices carrying in the breeze. I followed with Meredith, our laughter mingling with the children's. When we settled under the shade of a large oak, Lily curled against me and Charlie leaned on my other side. Their small hands slipped into mine, warm and trusting. I looked at their faces flushed with sunlight and laughter and felt a peace I had not known in years. I thought of Richard and whispered in my heart that I had made it through, that I had fought back and found love again in the most unexpected places. At 68, I had discovered that strength does not fade with age. It grows quieter, steadier, waiting for the moment it is most needed. I had faced betrayal, cruelty, and lies, but I had also reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and the love of my family. As I sat with Lily and Charlie Meredith smiling at me from across the blanket, I knew this was my true victory. Life had begun again, not in the way I once imagined, but in a way that carried even more meaning. Because at any age we can rise, we can resist injustice, and we can find our way back to love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, share your thoughts with me in the comments, and let me know what you felt while hearing it. Your voices matter, and together we can keep these stories alive. Do not forget to subscribe so you can stay with me for the next journey.